for joining us for our Raising Eagles session today on disordered eating among adolescents. My name is Ashley Croston. I'm Director of Community Services here in Allen ISD. And on our panel at the top, you'll see Christy Alexander. She is our Family and Community Engagement Liaison here for the district. She is the one that you receive emails from a lot in regards to Raising Eagles. And then our speakers today, we have New Narratives Counseling on board with us. We have Mackenzie Harris and Caitlin Milstead, and I'm going to let them share a little bit about their background, and then they are just going to take it from there. So welcome, ladies. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thank you. All right.
Okay. All right. So as Ashley said, my name is Caitlin Milstead. I'm a marriage and family therapist located here in Allen. Some of my experience and specialty a lot revolves around eating disorders, family units, working with adolescents, in all constellations of treatment. So outpatient, inpatient, and then doing a lot of family education and parent coaching around how to navigate a child with an eating disorder. So it's a quick synopsis of my background.
Yeah. And then I'm Mackenzie Harris. It's so nice to meet you guys. I feel so honored that Caitlin asked me to join you guys today. I am actually a registered dietitian and certified eating disorder specialist. I was here in Allen until January 1st, and now I'm just right across the street in McKinney. So still very, very close. But as a dietitian, I have specialized in eating disorders for the majority of my career, but also work with a lot of athletes. As an athlete myself, sports nutrition is really important to me. And so hopefully, if y'all ever have questions about that, maybe I can pop back in here, Ashley, and give you all some sports updates. But yeah, we're just very excited to chat with you guys today about our expertise at higher levels of care. So like more structured levels of care for eating disorders, and how to hopefully keep your client or your loved ones out of any sort of higher level of care, and hopefully keep them healthy, happy, and living the life that we want them to have.
Right. So some things that we want to go over and talk about today. Really want to do a lot of the basics. So we're not going to do a deep dive into any one particular eating disorder, but just really going over potential warning signs that you might see in your children or teenagers, things to look out for, behaviors that are a lot of times commonly associated with eating disorders, but maybe get chalked up to just disordered eating or some hyperfixations. Really help everybody understand and increase their understanding of complications related to dieting and eating disorders, and then how can we prevent eating disorders, talk to our kids about eating disorders, talk to ourselves about disordered eating, and just answer some questions along the way. Hope we've got some time. Okay.
Oh, sometimes it messes up. I got you.
Thank you. Okay. So a little bit about why we are here. Eating disorders are one of the most prevalent mental health conditions that we see in the society as a whole, not just teenagers. 9% of, or 28 million Americans are going to struggle with eating disorders in their lifetime, and a lot go undiagnosed. So this is the statistics that we have, but they're not always reported accurately. We also know that eating disorders are the second most fatal mental illness, second to opioid use. And so what we see a lot of times that it has such a high mortality rate and strain on the brain and body. So it's very serious, and we want to treat it as such. And it is also a very expensive mental health struggle to navigate. We see that billions of dollars are invested in not just diet culture and the diet industry, but eating disorder treatment as a whole. And so we want to help make sure families know how to navigate that as well, if you have questions in the end, to navigate the costs.
And I think the biggest thing that we'll get into in my section as well, just so y'all kind of know, when it comes to like the fatality of this is like one of the main mental illnesses that have such a huge medical component. So it's not only a mental illness, it becomes a biological illness, because there are so many like organs that are impacted by malnutrition or by purging or other behaviors that we'll get into. So please know this is like, yes, it is a mental illness. It is obviously the therapeutic and the behavioral side of it, but it's also extremely medical. And that's why we actually do a lot of presentations together, because if you talk about one, you really need to talk about the other, especially when it comes to disordered eating and protecting from that.
Okay, so some of the basics and some of the diagnosis you may know. We're not here to diagnose anyone, and we're not asking you to diagnose anyone, but there are quite a few diagnoses within the DSM for eating disorders, and we're not going to have time to go over all of them. We did want to go over the ones that we see probably more commonplace in treatment and outpatient settings. So some that you might have heard of: binge eating disorder, right? So we put the description there on the side. But what we see a lot of times is people very loosely using the term binge eating. I binged, I ate too much. Yes. And what we're really noticing is binge eating is not just eating past, fullness or comfort, right? Binging is very psychological. And what you're going to notice is that people who do binge and struggle with binge eating oftentimes struggle with overlap with other diagnoses, including maybe they're restricting, maybe you're noticing a cycle of restriction and then binging because their survival instinct kicks in. They're usually eating a larger quantity, 2 to 3 times what a normal individual would eat in a sitting. And a lot of times it's emotionally driven.
And I think for me, it's funny because again, we joke about a little bit, but people are always like, "Oh my gosh, I binged today. I had a bag of goldfish," and I'm like, okay, so that might be perceived as a binge because one thing that is characteristic of binge is that you feel out of control around food, right? So that's like this feeling of out of control, all of that kind of stuff. So a lot of people, I know I've felt out of control around food at Thanksgiving or like different holiday treats and stuff like that. But that out of control with eating a large amount of food in a short period of time. I think that's also a misconception. Like she said, that we always just think it's like eating constantly a ton of food, but there is a huge restrictive component to it. So I hate to say this, but intermittent fasting, someone's going to ask me about it on here anyway, so I'm just going to get it out of the way. Intermittent fasting is somewhat inducing of binge eating disorder because you go a long period of time without eating and you eat a large quantity of food in a very short amount of time because you only have a 4-hour window or whatever you would follow with intermittent fasting. And that is actually an inappropriate relationship with food that is not recommended. We can get into intermittent fasting later if y'all seriously have questions, but just so y'all know that is very characteristic, that it is very hard on your body to eat a large amount of food in a short amount of time. The only thing we missed is there's no compensatory behaviors. So sometimes people can have eating a large amount of food and then if they try to work it off after, by going to the gym or working out a lot, or if they purge or things of that sort, then we're moving into other diagnoses that Caitlin will get into. So this is eating a large quantity of food, but then nothing is done about it. And then except for shame and all the kind of induced emotional beliefs that we have. But yeah. And this is actually the most common eating disorder.
Yes. We see a lot of binge eating, and a lot of times it does go undiagnosed because it's just seen as overeating or struggling with discipline or willpower around food, which we'll talk a lot about languaging later. A lot of what we see as well is bulimia nervosa, which is something that is probably more commonplace. It's been around a lot longer and our understanding is pretty great around it. But typical bulimia behaviors would be oftentimes there will be a binge episode, right? So we'll eat past comfort. We'll eat a larger quantity than we would in a normal sitting. And then it's followed up by some form of compensatory behavior. So this might be purging, over exercising,
laxatives,
diuretics. So trying to find ways that you can purge your body of the food that you just ate. It can be very, very dangerous. Bulimia has a great deal of physical complications associated with it that we don't have the time to get into, but are very physically complicated harsh on the body. Another thing, I'm going to skip over ARFID and go to anorexia for a second, because it is another one that has just been around for a lot longer that we understand a bit better and kind of know the basics of, which is just restricting energy to the point of malnourishment. The biggest trick of anorexia is a majority of people who present with anorexia are not emaciated. They don't physically look like they have anorexia or would be undernourished. And so a lot of times it gets underdiagnosed. People don't think, I'm sick and I'm not sick enough, I'm not thin enough, so I'm just dieting, right? I'm just in a calorie deficit. And really that can be very dangerous if it's not done properly. And not that we're condoning caloric deficits in this presentation, but if it's not overseen by a professional in any instance, then a lot of times we don't know what we're doing and we don't know the stress we're putting on our bodies.
I think the biggest thing with anorexia for me that I want to chime in is, so absolutely the biggest, like one of the biggest takeaways for me on this slide is that yes, you can't assume someone's health by how they look. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. But anorexia, a lot of my clients with anorexia present in very normative or like very normal sized bodies. And a lot of them that are teens, I work predominantly with teens and adolescents. A lot of them, like their parents don't take it as seriously because like they're like, well, they're fine. Like they didn't change. Like maybe they had a little bit of weight loss. Maybe they're getting a little bit healthier. And like our own biases about our own body sizes, maybe as parents or adults, we're like, well, like that's good for them because like I wish I could lose the weight, right? Like that's kind of like what we see sometimes. And so that's the biggest thing, is that eating under the amount that, and we'll get into this a little bit, eating less is actually going to be harmful to their body, regardless of if they've lost weight or not, or if they appear emaciated or not. It will still have an impact.
And then we wanted to put ARFID on there, which is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, because it's something that we are definitely seeing more and more frequently in our practice. The understanding is growing around this disorder, and a lot of times it's been seen as picky eating or kids with just like hyperfixations around food or preferences. But what we're really noticing is it's actually putting children at a nutritional deficit because they are not getting all of the components their bodies need because of their picky eating. This also might have psychological fear associated, fear of vomiting associated. So again, it's a very complex diagnosis, and we're learning more and more every day. So I just wanted to put it out there. If you've noticed you've got a kiddo that's very picky or just really struggles with vegetables, it might not just be picky eating, and it could actually be an eating disorder.
Yeah. And you'll notice they'll stick with the same 5 foods or so, like the same, like very limited amount. And the 3 types of ARFID are sensory considerations, texture, look, smell, taste. It is fear of aversive consequences. So fear of vomiting, so emetophobia, fear of pooping in public, fear of peeing in public that's keeping them from eating enough at school, right? That would be considered ARFID. And the last is like general lack of interest. And most people with ARFID will be somewhat neurodivergent, so maybe autism, ADHD, et cetera. And that's not obviously they have to have that in order to have ARFID, but we will see some of those co-occurring where like sensory, being aware of our hunger fullness cues is not going to be as like attuned. Okay, I have to click it really hard.
Okay. And so, okay, so we just like to put the biopsychosocial up here to really preface that eating disorders and disordered eating are not, there's not one factor that goes into someone who might develop an eating disorder, right? We're probably usually going to notice a biological factor, so maybe a genetic predisposition, a psychological factor, so maybe someone who struggles with coping with their emotions, perfectionism, maybe there's a lot of comparison that they're seeing socially, right? With their peers online, social media, it's a huge factor. We obviously see a skyrocketed amount of eating disorders with social media over the last like 10 to 15 years. So you may have a child who struggles on the growth chart because of something biological. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have an eating disorder. Or you might have a child who tends to be a perfectionist and put a lot of pressure on themselves. Again, does not mean they're going to have disordered eating. But we kind of want to take into consideration all factors of the child to really see what we're looking at. Okay,
perfect. Yeah. Okay. So, and the only thing on that is that the eating disorder is a perfect storm. So I like to tell parents when I'm with them, with the clients that I'm working with, that the cream of the crop are the ones that end up in our office because they're the ones that want to be the best at school. They want to have the perfect body. They want to do all of these things. And it might start off as a very well-intentioned thing of, I just want to eat healthy. And then if that perfect storm comes together, like all of those Venn diagram components come together, that's when it can kind of develop. And so as a dietitian, just quick thing for you guys, these 2 things are pretty much like most of the kiddos that we see are going to be perfectionistic. Societally, there's a lot of pressure right now on how we look because of social media. So really the only thing that I can impart to you as parents is in this section, right? The only thing we can really hopefully change or from the precipitation of this being a perfect storm is their history of dieting. So if we can convince you as parents to help support an appropriate relationship with food going into your conversation with your kiddos, then hopefully we can keep the perfect storm from kind of happening. So we'll get into that in a second. As a dietitian, I actually cannot diagnose with DSM-5. So everything that Caitlin just beautifully went through, I actually will not diagnose your kid. Okay. That is entirely her and her team. As a dietitian, these are the three kind of spectrums or where we see clients with disordered eating. We use medical diagnoses. So I say like inadequate oral intake. So like not enough to eat. Any sort of like medical diagnoses is what we'll put on kind of our insurance super bills and things. But how I conceptualize them is there's intuitive eating, which is considered normal eating. I use big air quotes because normal is very subjective based on culture, your family, all of the different things. But intuitive eating is people that eat when they're hungry, stop when they're full. So when you're a baby, for the most part, I'm not saying everyone, but for the most part, if you're hungry, you're like, Mom, I want a snack. And if you're full, you leave the snack on the table, which is frustrating to you as a parent because you're like, I just opened those goldfish and you had two, but it's fine, right? So intuitive eating is really, again, that like eating when you're hungry, stopping when you're full, listening to your body's intuned knowledge. What is my body telling me I want and need? Disordered eating is when we start to ignore those. So we're starting to diet. So even though I'm hungry, I'm just gonna drink water. It'll make me feel full. Like that would be a disordered relationship with food. I'm gonna start avoiding eating carbs, right? Like that's gonna be cutting out whole food groups, which is not listening to what your body's telling you, because I'm sure carbs sound pretty good, right? And so this is when it gets disordered. The difference between disordered, because there's those things in eating disorders, is that it goes from disrupting your life. So a disordered relationship is like, I didn't have carbs, so I can still go out with my friends for lunch, and I can still engage, but I'm not going to have like the full cultural experience of being with my friends and eating pizza together, right? Because I'm avoiding carbs. Whereas eating disorder was like, they wouldn't even go to get pizza with friends. Like it's all of a sudden disrupting to destructive. Okay. So that's going to be kind of that like step of when does it turn and it's impacting their ability to do the things that you as parents and we as their team want them to do.
Yeah.
Right. We want them to enjoy life. So there's that. These are just some signs and I'll let you walk those.
Yeah. These are some signs that you might, keep an eye out for and pay attention for your kiddo. Again, sometimes kids do these things like wearing oversized clothes. It's very trendy right now with teenagers to wear baggy clothes. So take this with a grain of salt. Like many factors have to contribute to this perfect storm that Mackenzie was talking about. But things you might start to pay attention to is my kiddo struggling with variety of their meals, or are they eating the same breakfast, the same lunch, the same dinner? Are they counting calories? It's something we see a lot. They have so many apps these days. Are they trying to eliminate whole food groups from their diet, like carbs, fats? My assumption is that typically teenagers do not have the most accurate scientific evidence to why foods are important to our bodies. That's why we love the dietitians. But a lot of things they see on like TikTok and Instagram and whatnot. Are they preoccupied with losing weight? All of those things. But physically, you might also notice, are you seeing them go to the bathroom frequently after meals? Are you seeing them come down and just stop eating dinner with the family? Maybe they come and check in at dinner time, but they're not actually eating. They're going up to their room. Yeah.
Super common.
They're starting to lose their hair. They're starting to feel dizzy. They're starting to say they're not hungry a lot, right? Are you packing their lunch and noticing a lot of the lunches coming back home with them? And then socially, are we spending a lot of time in the mirror, not just getting ready, but body checking, analyzing our body, analyzing our faces.
You'll notice the wrist checks.
They'll check their wrists to see if they can.
Their legs, their tummy. They'll check if their tummy's flat.
Mm-hmm. Maybe they're not going out with friends as frequently. They're skipping birthday parties. They don't want to have cake on their birthday. They don't want to eat out with other people. One that gets missed a lot, and I say this because I think every teenager loves an energy drink. And they're really bad for you. But are they drinking a lot of coffee, a lot of energy drinks instead of actually having breakfast? They're chewing gum a lot and mints, but they're not actually eating food.
Yeah, those are all suppressing their appetite, by the way. So caffeine suppresses our appetite. And yes, to all of these, I also just like to acknowledge, like, as a parent, you probably will have a gut instinct. Like, if they feel off, like, I would dig in. That's why I always tell my parents, like, if it feels off, then I would dig in and just see, like, I guess, like, hey, like have like a very open conversation. I know we can chat more in the question section of like how to have this conversation. But as a dietitian, the biggest signs I see is really the cutting foods out. And it actually might feel very appropriate to you as a parent at first. Like it's like, oh, mom, like I'm trying not to eat as much cheeseburgers, especially during the New Year's, right? I'm not gonna eat as much cheeseburgers right now. I'm trying to eat healthy. And like you're like, oh, okay. Like you, of course, like we beg our kids to eat vegetables, right? It's like a rarity. So it's like when they want to do it, you want to keep it up, right? But that, if taken to the extreme of like all of a sudden, when you guys do want to get pizza or burgers as a family, they're like, oh no, I'm just going to eat at home. Like those are things you're going to start noticing where it's like, yes, it's good to be intentional about what we put in our body, but then it's to the extreme. So it's always like the intention is what I say. What is their intention behind this? Is it to eat healthier, or is the intention to change their body? And it kind of then spirals from there.
Yeah.
In terms of medical, the biggest thing, especially in females, will be their menstrual cycle. I know it's hard in teenagehood because they're all still getting it consistently. But that's a really, really big sign, is again, yes, hair loss, but that's a little bit of a further in the process type of sign. So I would really just start noticing like any dizziness or fainting, like kind of like lightheadedness. If you just see that they're weak, if you notice that they're pale or have like circles under their eyes, those would kind of be like my more big signs at first.
Eating disorders are progressive. And so the initial and early behaviors that you might notice might not raise a lot of concern, but they build on top of themselves. And so really just kind of paying attention. We'll talk actually later in the presentation about how to bring this up with your kiddo. And also recognizing one area that really gets misdiagnosed quite a bit is men and males. Maybe about 10% of males get diagnosed with an eating disorder, but we know the number is so much greater. It's just not something that's self-reported, and it's not something that gets looked into because a lot of times men will struggle with more body dysmorphia on the opposite end of the spectrum, not feeling big enough, struggling with the foods that they put in their body, a lot of comparison to other boys, sports. We won't get into that today, but it's just something to take note of.
That's a whole nother conversation. All right, so I'm going to do this speedy, okay? Because I know we have a lot to get to for Caitlin's stuff. So I start off every presentation, at least for the dietary component, to talk a little bit about like, how do you define health? And this is more of like a rhetorical question, obviously, because I can't even see you guys, unfortunately. But how do you define health? So these are like the literal dictionary definitions. So the state of being free from illness or injury, a person's mental or physical condition of being sound in body, mind, or spirit. So like if you're reading these, you're probably like, yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought health was. However, I feel like most people would also say that society kind of defines health as you should aim to be fit, thin, skinny, eating clean, eating superfoods, being guilt-free, healthy, macros, all that kind of stuff, right? And that it's not healthy, or you should avoid processed foods, junk food, cheat day, calories, carbs, fats, things that are sinful, sugar, and bloating. I feel like we'd also all nod. So like, yes to both, right? But what if I told you that neither of those is how I look at it? I mean, the first one's closer, obviously, but this is kind of how both of us as like clinicians do look at your health, is we define it by the dimensions of health. So there are 8 dimensions of wellness is technically what they're called. But I think of them as like, how does our health play into these dimensions, right? So you're thinking of health as physical health, which yes, very important. Obviously as a dietitian, that's where we typically are trained and stay. However, how is your spiritual health impacting you? That doesn't have to be religion. That can be just like whatever connects you to the greater universe, right? Do you feel like you are connecting around you? Emotionally, this is your mental health. How is your mental health? Are you anxious, right? Are you depressed? How is your depression or your anxiety impacting you? Are you ADHD like myself? And how is that? Am I missing snacks because I just get hyper focused on whatever I'm doing, right? So your food can be impacted in every facet of your health, occupationally, at work. Do you have a coworker that you don't like being in the lunchroom with or the break room with? So you avoid eating until 2 p.m. and now all of a sudden you're ravenous and you really want things that you feel like you shouldn't be having, right? Intellectually, we all have different nutrition, like levels of knowledge. Environmentally, do you have environmental standards that you are trying to uphold? Financially, things are expensive right now. How are your finances impacting what you can buy? Right? The grocery bill, I feel like you can't get away with what we used to, right? And so do we have to cut back? Is that impacting my quality of food, right? So, and then socially, of course, eating with others, that should be fun. Do I eat with others all the time and always have kind of fun foods? Is that impacting my ability to get physically beneficial foods? So the language that I use, and we'll have more language conversations, but the language I use with my clients is that food benefiting you physically? Is that food benefiting you spiritually? Is that food benefiting you emotionally? Like, how does it benefit you, right? So thinking about, and how is each facet of your health impacting the others? Is your mental health crap? So therefore it's affecting your physical health. So when people always come to me, as soon as I tell them I'm a dietitian, they're like, oh my gosh, help me lose weight. That's like the first thing, swear. And so my thing is always like, when it comes to especially weight conversations, is your weight is merely a symptom of where you're at with these dimensions. So your weight is a symptom. It's being impacted by your emotional health, your occupational health. Are you moving? Socially, do you feel connected, right? So that's kind of what I want you to start conceptualizing health, not just I'm going to eat healthy, I'm going to eat my macros, I'm going to focus on superfoods, right? Because that's only taking into account one component. I hate kale and tomatoes, and I'm a dietitian. Like, vegetables are my least favorite. And that's okay. I still eat them because I need them for physical benefits. But you don't need to force feed yourself to eat only things that are physically healthy, because you're going to be missing out on the emotional side of food, which is also very fun and necessary, right? So these are some anti-diet kind of philosophies I want to walk you guys through. So we both consider ourselves anti-diet. And so what that means is that it just means I'm anti-fad diet. So I don't believe in fads. They don't last. I'm wanting you guys and your families to have sustainable relationships with food that could lead to long-term benefit, right? Whatever you define that as a family, okay? So the reason I also believe I'm anti-diet or anti-fad diet is because 95% of weight lost through dieting is regained plus some. And the reason for that is your body has no idea you're doing paleo, no idea that you're doing intermittent fasting. It just thinks, especially with intermittent fasting, it thinks, holy crap, Mackenzie's in the desert. Don't worry, I'll protect her. I'll slow her metabolism down, and I'm only going to ration energy to the parts of her body that she needs to survive the Sahara Desert, right? So it sends energy to my brain, essential, right? So brain is essential, heart is essential, stomach, lungs, right? So that you can notice that that's a core trunk of your body. So you'll start noticing if you are currently on a diet journey, or your kids start cutting foods out, or you suspect disordered eating, your limbs, your hands and your feet, you can live without them, right? So circulation to extremities is sometimes decreased in people that diet or people that are malnourished. So you'll notice cold hands and feet. You'll notice parts of your brain that are not essential. So like, we obviously need to like breathe and our heart to beat for our brain, but we also don't need to like have the prefrontal cortex that makes decisions, handles mood, etc. So you might notice people who are chronic dieters or who are malnourished maybe have a little bit of an affect that is very flat, like a flat affect. They might not have any emotions on their face. They might have a hard time making executive functioning decisions because that part of the brain shut off. It's all being sent to the hindbrain, which is like the animalistic part of us that keeps us alive, right? So that's kind of like the biggest thing. And so it's important to us, especially for y'all going into prevention and also treatment of disordered eating, to make sure you're eating consistently. No fad diets are recommended in my book. The only quote diet or lifestyle that I even closely recommend is the Mediterranean diet. And that's a whole nother presentation. So where do we know this? There is a study called the Minnesota Starvation Study. So as you can imagine, it is not ethical to starve people. Who would have thought, right? But in World War II, they did not care. So at that point, this rule had not gone into effect. So this is how we know how the body reacts to malnutrition. I share this with you because I want y'all to understand biologically why I am so adamant that I do not believe in diets. Okay. So the Minnesota Starvation Study, brief overview. And during the World War time, these men were offered either you go to war or you could participate in the study, pretty much. And so, of course, they were like, sign me up. And so long story short, these men were they had a normal diet for 12 weeks, 24 weeks of starvation, 12 weeks of rehab, and then 8 weeks of unrestricted. And so the biggest reason I keep this slide in is because I want y'all to like notice, and I wish I could see y'all's faces. It's always like shocking. I want y'all to notice like the calorie amounts in this too. Does that surprise you guys that normal intake for these men was 3,200? And does that surprise you that starvation was technically 1,570? Typically, most people are shocked, and even the teens that I present to, because we're told nowadays that like 1,200 calories is normal per like MyFitnessPal and other people, right? Even sometimes like doctors will prescribe like 800 to 900 calories for people in larger bodies that want to lose weight. That is starvation. Again, your body cannot differentiate between I just want to lose a few pounds or I'm in the desert, right? So this is incredibly glaring because I think a lot of times people think that 1,200 calories is enough to survive, and it's not. That is actually stunting your metabolism. Okay. Now I will say, obviously I think there's 20 people on here. If I were to prescribe all 20 of you guys a meal plan, it'd be totally different. So I'm not saying that like prescriptive, there's an exact amount of calories that all of you guys should be eating, but that's why it's just important for y'all to understand that even 1,200 calories is barely enough for a large dog. So I don't know if y'all are dog people. I know we both are. So that is barely enough for your dog. Okay. I have a Great Pyrenees. She's a big girl, but just to give you guys some perspective. So your kids and you should definitely be eating more and modeling appropriate and consistent intake. Okay. Small children should be having 1,500 calories or more. Okay. So this is what happened in the study, and this is really glaring, and this is what I want y'all to kind of in line with what we talked about with warning signs. So physiologically, obviously, we already talked about the metabolism and all of the things affected by the metabolism decreased. But the biggest thing is the psychological changes, which is obviously why we have Miss Caitlin here, because there was increased irritability. So every single one of these men, none of them had eating disorders. They all were starved. These are all the symptoms. Increased irritability, inability to focus, depression, apathy, so again, that like kind of resting affect, increased hysteria, so like anxiety, hypochondria, preoccupation and obsession with food. Some of these men actually read recipe books to go to bed. Like, I'm not kidding. They were so hyperfixated, self-harm and social isolation. So if we talk about the mental health kind of epidemic of sorts, a huge part of this, I always question, like the diet industry came about 1980s, 1990s, right? So back in like kind of our times, that's when we started seeing such a rise in this. Now, I'm not saying like there's so many factors like social media, not helpful, but there are a lot of factors where I question as a dietitian, like, are we all undernourishing ourselves to where we're not actually able to do the executive functioning, all the things that we're asking our body to do? And so I don't know about you, but this is all of my clients have all of these symptoms.
Yeah, a lot of them.
Most of them. And so this is just something to like bring to your awareness. And this also like for you at Allen ISD guys, we're like teachers when they're having a hard time with a kid getting grades and stuff like that. I actually encourage when I present to teachers, ask your kids, like, when's the last time you had a snack? Like, did you eat breakfast? Have you eaten today? Because that also, again, even without eating disorders or disordered eating, that could be a really large impact.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add on these? Sorry, I kind of just went for it.
Yeah, that's great. Because it'll kind of bleed into our next section.
Okay. And so with that being said, we already mentioned this. So as a dietitian, I also believe in body diversity. So this means that all of us are meant to be different sizes and shapes. Okay. So the example, there's actually a video. I did not link the video. You can go Google it. It's called Poodle Science. It is kid friendly. It is totally appropriate. I actually recommend. We didn't think we had time. And you actually can link on it once I send you guys the slides. But long story short, this video actually likens it to dogs, because again, we're dog people. But what it talks about is that we can accept that there are different dogs and different dog breeds, right? So my Great Pyrenees and your Chow Pit mix, they're meant to be different sizes and shapes. So Millie and Dolly, they're meant to be different sizes and shapes, right? But in humans, we're like, well, everyone who's 5'5" should weigh this much. Right. And so like our kids are seeing these influencers and they're like, well, I have to look like that. Like one of my clients actually was like, I followed the Chloe Ting, I don't know who that is actually, influencer's workout plan because I want to look like her. And I'm like, well, you guys have very different genetics. Y'all are not like y'all. Yeah. And so there's also what I eat in a day videos where these clients or these kiddos and adults will like watch influencers and what they eat in a day, and they'll just try to eat like them to hopefully look like them. And our bodies are just so diverse that culturally, socioeconomic, racially, like all of the different, like gender wise, like we're all meant to be different sizes and shapes. And that's what is so beautiful. And so that's my biggest thing, is that when I like for y'all to think a little bit about like genetically, what is my body meant to look like? Because we might not all, like, I know I'm not meant to look like a model. I'm not meant to maybe like do different things. Like our bodies are all meant to have different functions and different appearances, and that's okay. But I think we're so trained nowadays to want to look the way that we see people on social media or people in our schools. We want to look that way. Anything else?
Yes, no, I think it's great.
So it's just a little quote that you can use with your kids. Even if we all ate the exact same way and exercised the exact same way, our bodies would still be different. So if they ever come home and they say, so-and-so had this for lunch, you can always use that little quote. Last thing, again, I'm not going to make you guys all meal plan. We don't have time for that. But just little rules of thumb for you guys to have in your back pocket. It is normal and recommended to eat consistently throughout the day. Eating every 2 to 3 hours, or 2 to 3 hours is what I recommend. 3 to 4 hours is the minimum. When you do eat, carbohydrate source, so that's a starch, which is like crackers, breads, grains, etc., with a protein or fat source. Fruit or veg will also count as a carb, so starch or fruit or veg with a protein or fat source every 3 to 4 hours. Obviously, meals are recommended. Don't just only eat snacks throughout the day. But at meals, you should aim to include at least 1 serving of all of the food groups every time you eat. Okay. This is just an idea of what I will work on with clients that have any sort of eating habits or disordered eating habits. So we're first working on making sure they're eating enough calories, enough of all the food groups, etc., making sure they have all the food groups on their plate consistently, getting a variety of those. If they're only eating apples, then making sure we have apples, bananas, strawberries, right? And being able to rotate between those. And then eventually we'll get to, do I have enough omega-3s, omega-6s? What am I deficient in? Because if they're not eating enough calories or enough of all the food groups, taking a vitamin is not going to fix their problems, right? I think that's the biggest thing is that a lot of people are like, well, I'm taking like 45 supplements. And I'm like, that's a lot of money and a very expensive pee, right? So let's actually focus on eating from food first, and we can supplement with the things that maybe your body needs more of. Okay.
Okay, so how do we model this at home? How do we talk to our kids? Because it's a sensitive subject and teenagers are going through a lot already, just being teenagers. So we want to be as cognizant as we can. One thing that we always try to preach is don't use moral language with food. So some foods are good versus some foods are bad. Some foods are healthy versus unhealthy, clean versus dirty, because then it very much polarizes food into these categories that then we start to think, if I have a child that's predisposed to an eating disorder or struggling with one, well, I can never have a cupcake because they're bad, right? And I can only have good foods. But what we really know is the body really doesn't care where you get your nutrients from at times, as long as it's getting the nutrients. So the glucose that comes from an apple or the glucose and sugar that comes from a cupcake, your body will process the same. But it doesn't mean we only want to eat cupcakes. It doesn't mean we only want to eat apples. And so we'll get to that. But really recognizing when we add morality to anything, especially to a teenage brain, it will quickly categorize and it will live and die by that category. And we want to make sure we're keeping things open and fluid and flexible for our teenagers to critically think and understand how their brains want to process things. And we don't want to pass judgment before they start to figure this stuff out. Right.
And the biggest thing, just quick thing is, so the way I use the language is, so an apple and a cupcake, I know, you know, and I know, and we know they're not the same. Okay. So I'm going to acknowledge that because you're gonna be like, wow, this dietitian's crazy. But what we mean is that the glucose, so the energy given from both, is the same when broken down, right? Like on the smallest form of the cell, right? But I always like to say, how does it benefit you? So the apple provides physical health benefits, and the cupcake provides maybe social, emotional health benefits. Maybe the cupcake was your grandma's recipe who she passed, and you're thinking of her and enjoying that kind of connective moment. Maybe it's your birthday party. Like that would be so sad if you went to a birthday and had an apple and everyone had cake, right? So those are the language shifts that I'm having, is have something that brings you emotional comfort, emotional benefit, but let's just make sure we're having a balance of things that provide physical benefits. And again, think back to that wheel and you'll have this presentation, but that's kind of how I use it.
Okay, recognizing that we sometimes support and encourage people based on what we think they want to hear, right? And so we might compliment people and say, wow, have you lost weight? You look so good, right? What are you doing? But I don't know if Mackenzie loses weight. I don't know if Mackenzie lost weight because she has cancer, right? And she's on chemotherapy. I don't know if she's lost weight because she has an eating disorder. I don't know what is going on in her life. And so one thing we really encourage all adults, parents, teens, is to learn how to compliment and build people up, not just based on appearance. And being able to say, there's some examples, right? Like, you light up the room, right? You truly make a difference in people's lives. Really recognizing that people are more than just their outer appearance, that they are an end of the external can always change, right? My weight can fluctuate up and it can fluctuate down, and my hair can be short and it can be long. Who I am as a person is probably the most consistent. And that's what I want to take pride in, because as the external shifts, I can hold consistent with who I am as a human. And we want to make sure that we don't just compliment people on how they look, because again, it becomes that categorical, polarized messaging that one is better than the other.
Yeah. And just one example, because I think it really hits home for parents, is so when I worked at residential, we actually were at the same facility at one point, but different times. When I worked at a treatment center, I had a very young client, around 8 to 10 years old, come in. And the first thing that this client told me was, I hate my hips. And I was like, I don't even think I knew what hips were when I was 8 to 10 years old, but that's okay. Okay. And of course I'm stoic. I'm like, okay, tell me more. And so she didn't really know where it came from. She doesn't know why she believes that, but she just really was fearful of gaining weight in her legs and hips. And then I always do a parent assessment similar to what Caitlin does. And the mom came in and immediately was like, oh my gosh, I don't have an eating disorder with these under thighs. And like, it was a joke and all these things, but it actually came out, long story short, that the kiddo was told by grandma that she's mom's mini me. So anytime the mom was like, these under thighs, oh my gosh, I need to lose weight, or all of these things, even if it wasn't a comment about that person's body, even hearing just maybe some own body image concerns could then be imparted or maybe kind of like abstracted from the comment of, grandma thinks I look like mom doesn't like her legs, therefore I don't like my legs. Okay. So I'm just giving that as an example. You are not going to be perfect. I still comment on my body. We all make mistakes. That is part of socially how we were raised, but just being aware of like how my words are going to impact my loved ones. How are they going to impact the people around me? Right. And so the same thing goes for food. If you say, I have a client who was told when they were like 4 that oatmeal is bad, because that was back during the time where that was part of the fad diet, that oatmeal is bad. It's not bad. Spoiler alert. But now they will not eat oatmeal. Yeah. And it's because of like what the belief was when the parents were younger and told the kiddo like, oh, we don't have oatmeal, right? So just being aware of just being neutral with our language is kind of the biggest thing.
Yeah. And recognizing kids are sponges. They're always paying attention and they're always listening. Yeah. So how we talk about ourselves, how we talk about other people, how we talk about them, they're going to absorb. And so how do we talk about these concerns with our kiddos? So we talked about how we can model it a little bit, and we'll go back to that, but how can you really bring up a real concern with your kiddo of, hey, I think that they might be struggling? I think as parents, a lot of times fear is construed as anger for teenagers. When our parents are scared, sometimes it comes off as anger, and kids tend to self-preserve and shut down. You might have you have teenagers at home and they hate talking about their emotions. So we really want to make sure that we're approaching these conversations, right time, right place, right? Like, don't do it before the SATs. And really coming in compassionate and neutral and just open, okay? To really ask your kid, hey, here's what I'm noticing, and I just want to talk about it. I'm not accusing you of anything. And really opening the door to listen. Because what you might notice is we might have this instinct to flood them with information. Like, Mackenzie and I are giving you a ton of information right now. We would not give this to a teenager off the bat who's struggling. They'll feel lectured, they'll feel flooded and overwhelmed. And then the emotion doesn't have an opportunity to shine through. And so we don't want to lecture our kiddos on all the scare tactics around eating disorders. We just want to hear them out, right? So be open and honest. Teenagers are very, very smart, and they're only getting smarter. They know so much. Truly. They're so informed. And so don't infantilize them. Like, be upfront. Here's my concern. You don't have to dance around it, but expect that they will probably deny it.
100%.
Kids and adults hold on to their eating disorders like a safety blanket. And we'll talk about that very quickly, but they're not going to willingly want to give that up off the bat or admit to it. Probably. Nope. They might not have admitted to anybody else. So it might be a hard conversation. Seek out professional help, right? If you need guidance, If your child needs help and assistance, like that's why professionals are there. And so you do not have to navigate this alone if there is a real problem that you're noticing. And then setting appropriate boundaries and recognizing process addictions, which is what eating disorders are, is an addiction to the process, and they're very hard to parent. It's not as black and white as skipping curfew. Okay, you're grounded. Well, I might not ground my kid for not finishing their breakfast, but I also know my kid needs help keeping their body physically well. So holding boundaries in space of, if we're seeking professional help, if we're trying to turn this eating disorder around, we're going to have rules in place around mental health. And that is a different presentation, or email us directly and we will help you.
Yes.
So things to pay attention to. Food is a coping skill. We all do it. We all use it. Okay. Eating disorders are a coping skill. They're an emotionally avoidant coping skill to deter us from having to deal with hard feelings. Okay. So I just threw in some options for you guys to give your kid every now and then if they are struggling with needing a coping skill. And we'll dive into them a little because I know we're running out of time. We've kind of talked about this
I
already.
don't know why that ended up there.
Yeah, we might have.
Sorry, guys.
So one thing we want them to do is we want them to listen to their body, right? Notice when they're hungry, notice when they're full, notice when they're content. We want to avoid distractions at meal times. So we don't want to be watching YouTube or playing on our phone or whatever, playing video.
Those can be good coping skills later.
Yeah.
Just during a meal or snack, if we're trying to get them to clue into their body's needs, it's just not helpful in that moment because they might eat past the point of fullness and then be overwhelmed with emotion, or we might have them avoid, you know what I mean? So we just want to make sure that they're present in that moment with appropriate distractions like conversation with you or things of that sort.
That we're paying attention and saying, okay, if we're noticing we're eating past our comfort level or we're under eating, are we first and foremost just paying attention to what we're eating, like sitting together at a meal and enjoying it? I know it's hard when you have multiple kids, activities, jobs. We're really encouraging this hunger fullness scale, which you can always reflect back on. What is my body communicating to me? Our bodies are not flesh vessels to look at. That's what I tell my teenagers. They're not just here to be looked at, right? Our bodies tell us when we're sick, when we're tired, when we're anxious, it sends us so many signals all day. And our brains usually try to override those signals and say, I know I'm feeling sick, but I have a huge presentation. Don't worry, we're not sick. I really want to play in the soccer game, but I know my ankle's been hurting, but I don't want to miss out because we have district, right? These are things that we tend to override as much as we can. We do it with hunger and we do it with fullness as well. So really teaching our kids how to pay attention to our bodies and tune in and say, what is my body trying to say? Does it need rest? Does it need a snack? Does it need water? It's not a perfect communication system, but if you pay attention, you'll learn a lot. And honestly, you might prevent long-term consequences. You hear people with health conditions that go unnoticed because we disregard it. So it's a good skill past just eating and food-related issues for them to learn.
Yeah. And it's important that like everything we've discussed up until this point, like the internalized beliefs, like for example, if I'm craving chips and I was just outside in the Texas heat at my son's soccer game, if my internalized belief is like, well, chips are bad, I'm not going to eat the chips. But if you think about it, chips are potatoes, which is carbs. They have potassium in them and the sodium or the salt on top. Those are the three things that your body probably needs after like replenishing a day out, right? In the heat. And so that actually might be the best thing for your body. And so like making sure like, yes, can I acknowledge what I want? But then also how am I like listening to it? Like, am I doing things without internalized beliefs that are negatively impacting my like relationship with food or movement, etc.?
Yeah. I tell teenagers a lot, like what we don't want to be is what we call decapitated. We don't want our brain and our body to be working separately. We always want them working together as a team. And eating disorders, like I said, are very emotionally avoidant. And so it separates out brain and body. So we want to reconnect those two. And those are things that we can also model for our kids. Another thing that's important to model and try and encourage at home is joyful movement. So movement is not necessarily compensatory caloric burning exercise. I don't just go to the gym because I'm trying to maintain my weight. I play tennis with my friends because it's we love pickleball.
Yes.
Right. I go rollerblading. I had a friend and she had a girls group on Friday mornings called the Blade Babes, and they would rollerblade every Friday morning. And it was just fun.
That's so fun.
We can connect with our bodies physically. And so we do want to encourage our kids to move and be active. It's good for our heart. It's good for our endorphins and our mental health, but we don't want to instill that exercise is purely compensatory behavior.
And the only thing I would add on that, being an athlete myself, is I just want to acknowledge, like, not every practice will be fun and joyful. So that's okay if your kid or you yourself have like a workout or a practice that you're like, well, that stunk. Like, that was the worst. So like when we say joyful movement, it's like, is this bringing celebration to what my body can do? And am I gaining something positive from this? So like, it can also be like, for example, if I'm learning a new skill, and I do not do this, but if I were to do a cycling class, and I've actually never done one, so I were to do a cycling class, if I like am challenging myself to a new skill, that can be the joy in it, even if the class was really hard and like the workout was hard, right? If I'm pushing myself to be a morning person, and like I get the enjoyment out of like waking up early and having a cup of coffee while the sun is rising, like that is also like, those are the different things. One example I also give is that, so I going to the gym, if you ever see me in a gym by myself, I'm red alert. I don't go to the gym by myself because I don't find it joyful to go by myself. Going with my husband or a friend, that is joyful for me. So again, like the gym itself, not joyful. Bring in something else to make it joyful. That is joyful for me. So even like assessing your own movement and your kids' movement of like, what is bringing them joy? Karaoke is movement. Theater, if you've ever been a theater kid, like rehearsals are a lot of work. So like also movement. So don't knock it till you try it. Gardening, also movement. And so the example too is that right now, prime New Year's resolution. If you make a gym membership right now and you hate going to the gym, you'll probably do it for 2 weeks and then you'll be like, I'm never going back, right? That 2 weeks of physical benefit for your body will not outweigh someone who loves gardening, obviously not in the snow, but who loves gardening and does it year round. Even if it's a lower intensity movement, doing it more often and doing it with joy is actually a greater benefit, not only physically, because you're doing it more, but then mentally as well. So that's just kind of the nuances, but again, totally other presentation we could dive into.
Yeah. And really, like we said, I know we have a couple minutes, is paying attention to how we talk about movement and how we talk about exercise is how our kids are going to learn to have a relationship with it. And so if they can find fun in movement, they're more likely to be active adults and active through the rest of their lives. Okay. We're going to skip over this a little bit. It's just some green flags and some red flags of if we're using movement appropriately.
Y'all can read it later.
Yes. And then we also wanted to give some resources, some books that might, if you're interested in the topic or want to dive a little bit deeper, some books that we use in our own practice. But I just wanted to leave like 5-ish minutes for any questions you guys might have.
And there's more than that book-wise. So,
oh yes, we have lots of books.
We can send more.
Aesthetically, we only put a few.
So now I'll stop sharing too, so we can see you guys.
Yeah.
That was super informative. I feel like I learned a lot, and I'm going to have to go back through and look at some things. But everybody, if you have questions, if you'll throw them in the Q&A, and then we will ask them. Christy will ask them, and then our fabulous ladies here will get those answered for you.
Yes, I know we threw a lot in there to try and put as much out there while we can.
And we even condensed that. So again, like we have multiple side tangent slides that we could also do for you guys later.
Oh, that was really good.
It was super helpful. Yes.
Very I gotta think about what I'm going to eat now. I like literally started intermittent fasting yesterday.
Like, I'm not going to do it.
I'm so sorry. Again, and it's only, everyone can have this, like while we're waiting for questions, everyone can have their own journey with food, exploring how your body reacts to different times, etc. It's very person specific. So if you notice that you feel better, again, it's totally, as long as the intention behind it is to feel good and to allow your body to want to do. I always ask my client, what is your intention? And is it harming you? If those two answers are no, then that is totally fine.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question out there. It says school food versus home food. Can you throw some insight if there is some benefit of asking kids to have have home food for school lunch?
Okay.
That's a good question.
Okay.
You may jump in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, very good question. Very hard to navigate because, and it honestly depends on how your kid reacts. So I have several clients who are like eating the school food. My husband and I joke about this all the time. My parents always just like packed my lunch every day, and I was so sad because like there was always pizza, and I was like, dang it, I just really want the pizza at school. So it depends on if your kid is really wanting the school food or if they're hesitantly wanting the home food or whatever it is. So the biggest, I guess, advice without knowing the specific situation is that looking at the plate, do we have all the food groups? So whether that is at home or at school, do we have all the food groups? So if we go to school, are we getting a protein? Are we getting a carb? Are we getting a fruit or veg? Do we have a fat? So like a butter, oil, avocado, cream cheese, whatever. And do we have a dairy of sorts? Those are all very essential, especially in the growing years for a teen, adolescent, etc. So if the answer is no, that all of those are not present, then what I would recommend is you can get all of those met with a home food or like a packed lunch, or you can send what is missing with the kid and they can have the school lunch, right? So that's kind of my best advice. The next thing would be more of, let's look at, do I have variety? So if they eat at school every day, are they always getting chicken nuggets? Is it chicken nuggets every day? Because I know some schools have like, they have different choices of lines and there's one that's always there. I think it's like, you can always get pizza, or you can always get chicken nuggets or whatever. So like, fine, but variety actually gives us not only different like palate benefits of like it tastes good and different and it keeps us excited, but also different physical benefits. So like there's things called phytochemicals, which are chemicals that come in different colors of fruits and vegetables. So even if I only ate apples, yes, I'm getting all of my food groups, like I'm getting all the food groups, but I'm not getting all the vitamins and minerals because a green apple versus a red apple are different. If you get purple grapes, that's giving you something different. Orange carrots. So like you're getting all of those. And so as long as your kiddo is getting a variety of colors in their fruits and vegetables, they're getting a variety of different proteins. So only chicken gives you one type of nutrient breakdown. Let's add some fish. Let's add some beef. So they all just give you different things. So I hope that was helpful, but again, sometimes very specific to answer.
Yeah. And I think like socially, there's sometimes a lot of pressure around eating around other teenagers, right? So, oh, I don't want to take my lunch because I don't have anyone to sit with. I don't want people to see me eating. Maybe I'm embarrassed by my lunch, right? And all my other friends are getting food from school.
Yeah.
And sometimes I just want to get a bag of Takis and a Celsius from the vending machine, and I don't want to eat, mom's chicken from the night before. Okay.
Which I don't recommend.
No,
I
the
don't
Takis and the
recommend
Celsius.
the Celsius.
Yeah, eat mom's chicken. But so also like, is there socially a component to why we're not wanting to take food from home? So
especially with like a cultural part of it too, because there's also like I have a lot of like culturally diverse clients, and so I have a lot of people that practice kosher, and then just like different like cultural backgrounds. And so is there that part of it with the social aspect of eating at school? Microwaves, I will say this is more for LNIC people. Some of the schools, their microwaves are supposedly very scary. That the microwave line is really long, and then that the like microwaving it itself is like sometimes very dirty because all the kids will blow up their spaghetti. And so it's just funny because like you have to dig in with the non-judgmental questions of like, hey, is it because the line is long? Is it because of the food I'm sending you with? Like just those kind of questions. But yeah. Fermented foods, I mean, they're great for you. I will start off by saying like it is incredibly helpful. They're extremely good for your gut health and really building out your microbiota, which is gut bacteria. Sounds weird and kind of gross, but it's actually very beneficial. All of our like intestines and guts have bacteria in them. And then unfortunately, there's no better language yet. There's good and bad bacteria. I know we just talked about morality and no good or bad, but there are more beneficial bacteria in your gut and less beneficial. And so fermented food will help colonize the more beneficial for your health gut bacteria. I will say, very hard to get some kids to eat fermented foods.
Yeah.
So that is one thing where like, if you can find a food that your kiddo will eat, like I have actually, weirdly enough, a lot of clients recently, sauerkraut, they're okay with. So like, I know, I see the face. It's same. I love other fermented foods, but that's not one of mine. So really, if you can, incredible benefits, but don't stress too much. There's also like probiotic pills, gummies. You can get probiotics from yogurt. Obviously, they're all going to give you, again, variety, different types, but again, still beneficial.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, we have another question. How do I get my 8-year-old to eat fruits? I add fruits to his lunchbox, and every day he comes back home with it. And I sit him at the dining table and literally stand over his shoulders for him to eat it.
Ay, ay, ay. That is the question of a century, anonymous attendee. Yes. I mean, you can jump in and then I'll jump in.
Absolutely. Kids are going to be instant gratification brains. Okay. So what brings them the most dopamine in the moment is what they're going to gravitate towards. If I can trade this apple for a pudding cup, I'm probably going to do it, right? Or just avoid it. So I always say parents get to choose what the kids eat. Kids decide how much they eat of it. Obviously that this differs if they're malnourished. If you can play around with different fruits and vegetables of, okay, they don't like a hard chopped apple, but maybe they'll do a smoothie, a yogurt, a juice, kind of like Mackenzie's pyramid of adequacy and balance is if we can't get him to eat or them to eat just a solid serving of fruit, where can we kind of incorporate fruit that is more palatable and build into it? Because eventually we don't want to coddle the food avoidance, but we want to start somewhere. And it's okay that that's a journey. But kids are instant gratification. They're not concerned about long-term consequences of, not eating fruits at 8 years old. So we kind of have to say, this is what I'm going to pack you. They're going to decide how much of it they eat, but we get to decide what foods they're presented with.
Yeah. I was going to give, this is not a paid ad. There are 2 people on Instagram that I follow that are very good at visualizing what I do in session so that you can hopefully do it at home. So there's 2 social media accounts. It's called Feeding Picky Kids. So Feeding Picky Kids. And then the other one is Feeding Picky Eaters. Okay. This does not mean that your kid is a picky eater. I'm not diagnosing your son with ARFID. Okay, just make that very clear. However, the one image I wanted to show you, we call it food mapping as dietitians. And so if you find the one fruit or vegetable, like she was saying that they like, so let's say apples, we find what is similar in texture. So the first thing that came to mind was like jicama, pear, like other things that would be that similar, like crunch, texture, like all of that. And so start with those foods. Or what's the same color? If he likes red grapes, what other red fruits can we try? And so you kind of just do that. It's called food mapping. This is a little visual of it. So basically this is going from chips to carrots. So basically you start with chips, then you go to different type of chip, and then you work your way towards full carrots, but obviously it's a bit of a journey. Okay. So this is just an example. It's called food mapping, and that's what we do in session, but it is a journey that's why I have a job, is to help you guys through it. But you can do it yourself, but it is a little bit of I would expect a few months to get from one step to the next. And so I think sometimes parents expect we'll just start eating carrots. And it's well, we got to work our way up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know we're, but I don't have a cutoff.
No,
so
yeah.
we need to keep
questions.
Yeah. If y'all have time, we have time.
Yeah, we have a couple more. Let's see. My kid wants to lose weight and I want to help her. However, how to help her with unintentionally making her eat in a disordered way. By the way, I struggle with a disorder and I'm scared that she may develop one.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a very fair concern, right? Because we know that socially dieting just predates our kiddos' generation, right? We've all grown up in diet culture in some context, and it's not going away anytime soon. Mackenzie has thrown out the buzzword intention a ton. And I think that's the biggest question is what's my intention of wanting, or her intention of wanting to lose weight, right? What's going on for her? How is she viewing herself, her body, her self-worth? Again, it's not to say changes in our nutrition and overall diet as a concept, right? We all have a diet daily that we eat is necessarily a bad conversation to have, but how are we having it? And are we doing it with the appropriate science and education and for the right intention, right? Am I losing weight because kids in math class are making fun of me, right? Do I want to lose weight because I'm interested in someone and I'm hopeful that they'll find me attractive, right? Dieting very much progresses into eating disorders time and time again. Nobody wakes up and says, I want to have an eating disorder, right? So I think really just very non-judgmentally asking, why do we want to lose weight? What's going on? And then I would loop in a professional if you're really concerned of, hey, I think this could progress. I think mentally, emotionally.
Especially that genetic component of maybe you having those kind of
Yeah.
perfectionistic, perfect storm tendencies. The biggest thing for me is, so I'm gonna be a little bit firm with, I don't actually really recommend weight loss in adolescents in a severe sense, because right now their body is growing and we actually only develop bones as females until 23, as males until 25, 26-ish, right? So if our body does not have the stores to develop, then we will have problems later on in life. Osteoporosis in women is high because unfortunately sometimes we don't develop bones to the same mineral density that we would hope, right? So that's one thing, but I'm not saying that I don't allow weight loss. It's more of, again, the intention. So I always ask what is the intention? And then my biggest thing is I never pursue, so I will never manipulate anyone, not even just kids, adults. I will never manipulate someone's body to look a certain way. I will address their behaviors, and if that impacts their weight, then so be it. So for example, like if you go back to that wheel, if you think about that wheel of all the dimensions of wellness, I would ask your kid, do you feel like anything in your life is out of whack? Like, do you feel like, is your mental health out of whack? Like, do you feel like you've been anxious and you've been coping with food? Do you feel like socially you've been feeling really stressed? Have you been bullied? Like, you would take stock of, and I would do this as an adult too. I take stock of what is out of whack right now, and how could that impact my food and therefore my weight? Or how could that impact my movement, therefore my weight? And so it's more of weight is a behavior. Weight is a symptom, not a behavior. You don't behavior change your weight. You change your behaviors and your weight is impacted.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is my biggest thing, is like, what behaviors, and then let's say we address those behaviors. Let's say we have some things out of whack. And let's say your kid is meant to be a certain size, and that's the size they're meant to be in, and we learn to accept, as long as, again, everything else is healthy. So that's everything else is within normal limits medically. If you feel like socially they're doing really well, all of that kind of stuff. But again, take stock of, is there anything that is out of whack that could be contributing to this? If so, let's address that. Once that addressed, if their body is not what, maybe if you have your own biases about what your kiddo should look like, or what your kid has their own bias of what they look like, that's when we work on it, right? But I just am very leery of weight loss in kids. I'm gonna be very honest with you.
All right. The last question we have, I approached my child about potentially having an eating disorder, but she denied it. I told her that I am available to help her if she ever needs it. Now, what do I do if she will not admit it, but is struggling with the eating disorder?
Sure. Well, one, I'm glad that you kind of left it open-ended and left the line of communication open, because that's really what teenagers need. They don't need a lot of pressure. They just need to know my parents are here for me in this very non-judgmental, non-reactive way. When we overreact, kids shut down. If you know that your kid is struggling with an eating disorder, we have to remember their teenage brains, regardless of their nutrition, still not ready to make all the hard decisions for themselves. And so sometimes as the parent, you just have to come in and say, well, I think you have an eating disorder and we're going to go talk to someone, right? Now, this could be an eating disorder informed physician that maybe can do some labs, some testing. It can be a dietitian, it can be a therapist, and just say, let's just go meet and talk, right? Let's go talk to someone. Maybe I don't know everything. Maybe they just will feel safer. Not that you're not safe, but it's easier sometimes for teenagers to talk to a professional versus the emotional connection that goes with parenting. And saying, hey, I know you said you don't have an eating disorder. I am still worried, and I just want you to have a safe outlet to talk, whether you talk about food or whether you talk about school. I just want to provide you with the resources. And so what I would do is I would contact a professional. Mackenzie and I's information is in the slide, and you guys are more than welcome to pass it on to all parents, that we can help get you connected to the right resources in the area that we know just based on need. But I would say, hey, I know you're saying you don't have one. I'm not telling you you do, but I do want to make sure that you're getting the help that you need. And this is what I feel like as your parent, we need to go do. Okay. Because they're going to deny it. That's why I even put it in the presentation. They're totally going to deny it every time. That's normal.
Yep.
It's totally normal.
The only thing I would add is, so yes to all of those, in terms of our information, as Caitlin said, we not only will connect you to either ourselves, but also other, like there's good like personality fits too. Like you want to make
Yeah.
sure your kid is connected personality wise. I know that I am a little bit extroverted, and so that might be a lot for some introverted kids, or maybe it helps pull them out. So if you know your kid and like we can help, just like let us know what you want and need in a support team, and then we can help get you connected.
Yeah.
But the only other thing I'll say, and I'm very open about this, I actually had my own eating disorder, and that's why I became a dietitian. And so I use this like example to help hopefully translate for parents what their kiddo's going through, because I couldn't communicate to my mom and dad what I was experiencing in that moment because I didn't have the words. I felt very stuck. And so I explain it as an outer body experience where I saw myself doing these things or doing these behaviors or not eating enough or whatever. And I couldn't stop myself. Like I felt like I could not stop doing the things. And there was a part of me that was like, I totally acknowledge, like I like acknowledge my mom's concerns. I was like, yes, this is concerning. I want to stop doing these things, but also that was my coping skill. And it felt very scary to think of a world without me being able to count calories or whatever, right? And of course, this is I only share this with parents. My disordered eating is not typically shared with clients. Just for you guys to know that, like, if y'all ever need a translator, or if there's ever any like help that I can help support, I'm happy to share. But please know that I think your kid most likely wants help, but it feels scary. Like, even if they like maybe deny it, like I think there is an element. So there's always a part that feels very scared. I think that like inner child that feels nervous. And obviously, again, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but as a therapist, but from my experience, there's it's a coping mechanism to say, no, I don't have this. But then deep down, like there is like a lot of, internal turmoil, if you will.
Okay.
Well, that looks like that's all of our questions for now. Girl, thank you so much. This was awesome. Really, really informative information, really good things for everybody to know and hear and be able to process. So we will share, if you're okay with it, your presentation and then the recording on our website. And then we'll also share this with all the attendees today.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You guys
Awesome.
have fun.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, y'all take care. We'll see you later.
Bye, guys.
Bye.